If you go and have a look at the Satipatthana Sutta, or the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, the four foundations of mindful awareness, as they're commonly called, short sutta, sorry to use the Pali term, where the Buddha lays out quite succinctly not only the instructions for Zazen, which is sitting meditation, which he does right at the beginning, he then goes on to give the what we call daily life practice, what he calls the four foundations of mindful awareness. And this is the part where, he says that the first foundation is the foundation of the body. When the monk is walking, he knows he's walking. When he stretches out his arm, he knows he's stretching out his arm, and all that. And then he goes on with the second foundation, which is feeling sensation, which is a mind element or mind object. When he's experienced something pleasant, he knows he's experiencing something pleasant. When he's experiencing something unpleasant, he knows he's experiencing something unpleasant. And then he goes on to the third foundation, which is called the foundation of chitta, commonly translated as mind. We tend to translate it as heart. And this is awareness of the heart. And so here, when anger arises in the heart of the monk, he knows that anger is arising. When it's not arising, he knows it is not arising. When his heart is concentrated, he knows his heart is concentrated. When it's dissolute and dispersed, he knows that it's dissolute and dispersed. And it's this third one. This is where the working with the emotional household is taking place, because there's a formula that runs through the whole of the Satipatthana with all the four foundations that finishes saying that the monk knows covetousness for the world and also anxiety and fear of it, or dislike of it. Then he is practicing this, and what we're seeing with that grasping and that rejection, having given up both of those things, that the Buddha is talking about a middle way, because those are two opposites. Grasping and rejecting, grasping and pushing away are the two extremes, and the Buddha is saying, in order to practice these four foundations, including mindful awareness of the emotional household, we have to give up the grasping, that is the chasing after the object of desire. We also have to give up the running away from the object of fear and of anxiety and loathing as well. And therefore, what we are left with is staying with the emotion itself, staying with the desire, the lust, staying with the anger or the fear or the hatred, without being carried away by the object, either chasing after it or seeking to destroy or run away from it. So this is where the basic formula for working with the fires, working with the emotional household comes from. And he says, this is the only way, O monks, for the overcoming of sorrow, the overcoming of lamentation, the overcoming of selfishness, and the attainment of nirvana, and the attainment of wisdom as well, the wisdom of anatta, the wisdom of no I, which is, obviously one of the three signs of being that the Buddha taught, along with suffering and all things being subject to change. So this is the basis for this practice. And I think that's really, I really want to make that point, that this is not something novel. However, how it gets interpreted and the imagery and the analogies and so forth, those things do change. Obviously they change because, we are not living 2,500 years ago in Northeast India, which is where the Buddha was teaching. And so there may be other analogies and there may be other metaphors and other symbolism that might be more useful for us to get those same principles across so that we can begin our own working with the fires. So Satipatthana Sutta, there's the lineage, and right the way up to the present day. And this is what Master Dayu Myokyo Ni taught. And for people who are interested in this, I really couldn't advocate more strongly her book called Gentling the Bull by Myokyo Ni. Gentling the Bull by Myokyo Ni, which is available from the Zen Center in London. If you're serious about Zen practice, and if you're serious about working with the fires, working with the emotional household, and experiencing this for yourself, that is a book I couldn't advocate more strongly to have on your bookshelf. You can go back to it again and again. Okay, so having said something about that, where it came from, the next thing I wanted to add, obviously, is how she taught it, in particular, and how she taught it to people like myself and her other students. Myokyo Ni as well also had a strong interest in the psychology of the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung. And she was very familiar with analytical psychology, and she was particularly interested in some of the symbolism that Jung used around this subject, because he obviously also was interested in the transformation of the psyche, as he called it, what was known as the individuation process. There's a couple of other troubleshooting Zen study and practice podcasts on this. You can go and look those up. In fact, the last one was on the archetypes of the collective unconscious, which is another Jungian term. And Jung also did a lot of research around the subject of alchemy. He was very interested in Western alchemy, in particular the symbolism of fire. And obviously, we've been talking about the fires. Interesting that we have that analogy, that's similar sort of usage, because it describes metaphorically how the emotions are often experienced. And the use of fire, and in alchemy, the use of fire that's used for transformation, for transforming the lead into gold, or the creation of the elixir of life in some cases. That lead into gold obviously is not the literal transmutation of a physical metal. The lead is seen as the starting point, the heart that is afflicted with these fires, and the gold perhaps is more analogous to the nirvana, the wisdom and compassion, the shining, precious metal. So it's the transformation process, and the fire is an essential part of that transformation process. So this is how Myokyo Ni used to explain this to her students, and I can, having sat through it many times, I can pretty much give it verbatim. So she would say, in the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha links together suffering and the cause of suffering, which are the attachments. Now, what are these attachments? The attachments are the presence in consciousness, in the psyche, in the heart, of states of stuckness. Perhaps the best way to describe this is the way that we become fixated, and in particular what we become fixated or identified with is myself. That this is the ultimate, for the Buddha, was the ultimate attachment, the attachment to myself. And again, the Buddha in many places in the Pali Canon makes this clear. So whilst the attachment to self is present in the psyche, is present in the heart or the mind, then we suffer as a consequence from. That is in essence what the teaching of the Four Noble Truths gives us as its diagnosis. So the release from the attachments is not just enough to say, well, from now on I shall not be attached, because I am the attachment. And in the same way as the saying goes, that the eye that sees cannot see itself, the knife that cuts cannot cut itself, neither can the I, that's the pronoun I, release him or herself from himself or herself or themselves nowadays. So that is something that really is essential. This is, I cannot be laid down by an act of will, by an act of my will, because, for obvious reasons, it's a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a tautology, and so another force, if you like, a force outside of I, is necessary in order to do this. And what is that force? What is that power? Hey, It's the power of the emotional household itself. And now we have that famous saying from the Northern tradition, the passions are the Buddha nature, and the Buddha nature is the passions. So if we regard the Buddha nature or the energy of the Buddha nature as the vitality of all living things, it is the basic energy that creates forms, both physical forms and also structural forms of behavior and becoming and ceasing. And in fact, the Buddha nature itself is the Dharma in living beings. There's also the Dharma nature in non-living beings, but they're still one and the same. There aren't two dharmas. That's let's just say, for our purposes, that the Buddha nature underpins everything in the universe. That's the ground of all being, and all forms, light and dark, old and young, up and down, male and female, living and dead, everything arises from it and to it returns as well. Perhaps we can use that as a sort of metaphor, just if we want to visualize something in that way. So the energy that is in the passions, such as as wanting, or hatred, or fear, is also fundamentally the energy of the Buddha nature. So this is how it's seen. So there is that correlation between the passions and the Buddha nature. What turns the Buddha nature into the passions? The attachment to I. In the presence of the attachment to I, in the presence of the attachments, the Buddha nature is warped and becomes the energy of the passion. So this is how it is seen in this formulation, this way of working. So that's what she used to explain. Therefore, she said, the only power that can erode those sticky attachments, the attachments to oneself, is literally to be bathed in the fire of the emotions itself, without running away from it and without getting carried off by it. Those are the two extremes. Remember, neither grasping for the object nor running away from it either. The actual living in the presence. And I'll give an example of this that she used to use. When she was librarian at the Buddhist Society in London in the 1970s, there was a man who came in, a very well-dressed, slim, middle-aged man who was there from South Africa. And his work took him around the world, and she got into conversation with him, and he was in London for business, and he said, I often come to London for business, he said, but I find it a city of temptations. He said, because it seems that on every street corner there is a wonderful bakery or patisserie, and the one thing that I have a weakness for are cream cakes, and as you can see, if I'm going to keep my figure, I can't be indulging too much in cream cakes. He says, so I'm leaving tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to going back home, because we don't seem to have so many where I am, and I shall be away from this temptation. And again, he was obviously interested in Buddhism as well, so she talked to him a little bit about the fires, and said, if you are willing to try an experiment, then let me give you something. She said, when you leave here, go and just walk round until you see a patisserie, and then when you find that your heart is stirred, you see a cake that you particularly like, go to it. Go and stand before the cake in other words, the object of desire. Look at it and internally really feel that wanting, feel that desire, and say to yourself, I want that cake. I want that cake. I really want that cake. And she said, when you are inflamed with that desire, close the eyes, drop off the cake, and just go, I want, I want, I want. And she said, and then cut off the I. Want, 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 and go right into that. There's no object now. There is even no I who wants. There's just that complete immersion, like being in, and this is where the analogy of the alchemy comes in. It's like being in a sealed vessel. You know, you've seen those round-bottomed vessels that you get in laboratories, and you imagine that there inside is that fire, and there's a cork firmly stuck in the top that's perhaps covered in wax as well to seal it right in, and that vessel is immensely strong now, and that fire burns, burns, really lifts that. And she said for 5 minutes, she said, if you can put up with the self-consciousness, which is another fire as well, by the way, and really do that, and you're brave enough to do that, and just see what happens, and then open your eyes, and then look at the cake again, and see if that desire is still there. And off he went, and she didn't think he would do it, but half an hour later he came rushing back and said, "It works. I just tried it and it worked. I opened my eyes and it was just the cake." That feeling of temptation had completely gone. "I'm cured." And she said, "No, you are not cured." She said, "It will return because the habit is very deeply inlaid. However," she said, "the next time that the fires come up, now you have something to work with. Now you can work with them. Now you know how to actually work with them." And what she said was, look, when we start working with the fires, don't imagine that because we worked with one fire that therefore, it comes to an end. Now I'm no longer being carried off by my temptation to eat too many cream cakes. Of course not. It will come back. But if we religiously work in that way with these fires, then what we find is that there comes a point where the whole thing comes to a head, almost like a pimple. You know, the pimple, you get a little bit of pus underneath it, and it raises itself up from the skin, and that boil grows, and then it bursts, and all the toxin just comes out all in one go, and then you clean it, and then it just naturally heals of itself. She said it's exactly the same with these afflictions, with these attachments. She said they come to a head, and having now been burned away, it reaches a tipping point, and then the whole attachment drops off. And when that happens, she said, you can feel it in yourself. The transformation has taken place. The heart opens. There is a spaciousness that wasn't there before, that we didn't even realize was there because we're so used to the attachments. And suddenly all sorts of other little problems that I've always sort of had, which I didn't realize but were connected to that attachment, have also dropped off. And she said life then becomes something quite different. And she said this is the process of working with the fires. This is how we work with the fires.